Welcome to this episode of Edtech People, discussing the past, present, and future of working with technology in education.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Edtech People, one of our special sessions episodes, the first of a few I hope. This is where there's a group of us who are going to talk about a particular subject. So this is the first time we've had more than just me and Jack on the podcast. So Jack's here as normal, and today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. It's great to have Austin on board. Austin, how are you doing?
Yeah, good thanks, mate. Good thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. And what are you doing these days with yourself? What brings you into this kind of conversation?
Most of my time is spent being director of IT for a multi-academy trust down south, and we've got lots of stuff to do there. So it's quite a dynamic place to be. Lots of change needed and lots of improvement needed. So that's keeping me quite busy.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Thank you for coming along. We've got Chris Maddox. Chris, great to have you on board. What are you doing these days?
Thank you very much. Yes, I used to work for education for 16 years, and about 3 months ago, I moved off to Google, so cyber security company. And yeah, just like yourself, when you went to Pontero, it's a bit of a different change. So yeah, trying to keep myself busy in education with a few other things as well on the go.
Awesome. That's great. And then Ian, you join us. Hi, how's it going, Ian?
Not too bad,
what are you up to? What are you up to these days?
Well, currently still working for Secure Schools. I've been there, nearly 3 years. Before that, I was IT manager at Concord College for 11 and a half years. Previous to that, I'd actually worked for MSP supporting education. So IT and education's kind of been in my wheelhouse for quite some time. And then 3 years ago, I decided to try and specialize to help more schools improve their cybersecurity position. So I went and joined Secure Schools.
Awesome. Great. Okay. Well, as you can see, we've got a panel of experts, or at least people who know what they're talking. No, maybe just people who are talking. So it's great to have everybody on board today. And so this is, all about cybersecurity in education. Now, Jack and I, we spoke about that in last week's episode, and we got such a good response out of it that actually we wanted to get a wider pool of opinion from people in the community on it, because it is probably one of the biggest elements that interact with everything these days, isn't it? So I just want to grab you, Jack, and see why you urged me to put this one together. Why do you think it was so important?
Well, Matt, I think it's a really interesting time, and I think Chris will probably speak to this a little bit, because I saw him post on LinkedIn about this earlier this week. But actually, obviously, we spoke last week, and then we felt some real good feedback. Ian, you reached out straight away about some points that we discussed, which we'll dive into later. And then a few days later, several educational institutes have been victims of a cyber attack, let's say, I believe over the last week or so. And I think the timing there is really, really interesting for this conversation. So I think that's probably the core focus about, or the reasoning why, is that ongoing threat to education. We know it's always ongoing, but then when we see like 3 in 1 week, it really reinforces that point, doesn't it? And I think it'll be interesting to see a couple of things from the conversation today, but I'd really be interested to see what other colleagues on the call think about what are some of the basics that everyone can do. What are our tick box exercises? Because, we often say, turn MFA on, that closes such a large gap. And I think, it still does close a large gap, but it's not as good as it might have once been. We all know now it's a layer-based approach. We need multiple things, not just MFA. Token theft exists, etc. So certainly interested in what Austin, Chris, Ian have got to say around what are those basic controls that essentially any of the schools can put in place, whether you're a big multi-academy trust or sort of a single one form entry village school that's got no budget,
Yeah, definitely. I think that starts probably a good place to start, really. And my first question to you all would be, quite simply, do schools appreciate the risk at the moment and the impact if it does all go wrong? Austin, probably best to start with you, still working within schools. Do you think schools that you work for and with are understanding how big a risk this is now?
I think in the abstract sense, yes. I think when you talk to safeguarding leads or executive leadership heads, I think a lot of them are really conscious of the impact that any instance around IT, whether it's a cybersecurity incident or like just an availability one. We've got MIS providers having a real tough time at the moment. I think last year, I don't think any of the major cloud providers had a completely free year. So or a year free of instance. So yes, there's a lot of awareness of that. I think the bit where it starts to, we start to see a lot of confusion or stuff just not matching up quite right is connecting that kind of big picture, cyber's a big risk for us, all the way through to, okay, so what are we doing? What are our operational capabilities? How well do we understand what we've got and the detail that actually helps you manage some of that risk? That gap, I think, in most of the trusts that I work with is the most significant one.
Yeah. That thing of knowing about something, but then knowing what to do about it or how to protect yourself. I think that's quite a big a gap that's there. Ian, when you're working in and around schools, in your role, are you obviously when they come to you, generally they've realised that they need to do something. Do they know what that is? Are they just ticking some boxes, or do
Well,
they
look,
actually
so
know what they need to do?
over the last, I mean, obviously, I've only been with secure schools for just under 3 years, but even over that time, I have noticed an increased awareness, right? So, whereas 3 years ago, like if I went to bet 3 years ago, the conversations you'd be having, they know they want something cyber, but they didn't kind of know the difference between what's a penetration test and what's a vulnerability scan and what's an audit. They just needed, oh, cyber's a problem, please help us fix it, right? And now there is actually, I think there is a generally increased awareness, and people are beginning to understand roughly what a penetration test is or what a vulnerability scan is. Um, I think the thing that's shocked me the most, because I came from educating to it, I kind of assumed that all schools or colleges would be where my head was at when I was at Concord, as in have fully kind of understood the problem. And then what I was at I was kind of in big throes at Concord, getting the senior leadership on board and getting stakeholder support. Because realistically, until you've got stakeholder support, both financially and from a kind of mandate perspective, I think you're fighting an uphill battle because otherwise you're kind of in this position where the IT department versus, I don't know if you've ever been there or you just kind of felt you were the guys who were like the fun police. You were, no, you can't show that YouTube video. We haven't got a copyright license. And then every teacher telling you you're a terrible person because you're stopped the school from breaking the law, those kind of things. And the trouble was like, so IT used to almost come across as like either a handbrake or a blocker to teaching and learning. And every time you ask for something to be made more secure, that would be something that creates friction for teaching and learning. Or would be perceived friction, right? Because, oh, my password needs to be longer. What do you mean all my children can't have the same password? Right. And so I think the real skill or the real challenge for me in IT, and I think it still exists now from the audits that I do, there are still problems where IT are trying to get the buy-in and the understanding and the support from the top. But I think that's getting better. But I was just shocked it was even there. I thought it was a done deal. Everyone at the top knew the problems, and everyone was trying to rally the troops to try and fix it.
I think if it was, we wouldn't be sitting here having that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of schools that I go into that still know that cybersecurity is a risk, but generally don't know how to deal with it, don't know how to sort it out, don't know what steps to take is huge. And we were talking about that last week, weren't we, Jack? In terms of do schools actually know what to do? And then, Chris, so you're in the field of obviously working with selling software, basically. Is that right? To stop these kind of attacks? Have I got that completely
Yeah,
wrong,
that'd
or
be
is that what?
correct. So I've only recently joined. So I've been there for about 3 months now. So I work for a company called Bull. It's a Danish company, and they basically do ransomware containment. And there's a couple of ways it works in terms of the algorithm, and then also finding the encryption process. This can be either on-prem or cloud premise. It doesn't make a difference from that personal, but majority of it is more for Microsoft 365. Unfortunately, as we touched on in terms with the basics of the MFA and conditional access, session tokens and stuff like that, I still will maintain threat. And you don't have to be on site to get that hijacked. You can have a normal laptop, Windows Defender. When I was down at VA and me, and Jack will know a bit about this as well, in terms of running VA and me on certain journeys or meetings, a lot of the cyber stuff was always coming up. Even if the topic was to get away from that, to have a better atmosphere in the meeting, somehow the cyber stuff always crept into things. When I was speaking on it, what I found most was how many schools just didn't have a response plan, just in general. Because even if you have a response plan, you've got something in place that could potentially get you going for that process of the recovery time. And a lot of schools just don't have that. And that's probably one of the most key things is we also hope that, the DfE released the cyber security hub, and we've seen a couple of things on that, on the security hub, where it's got good stuff and obviously it's got bad stuff as well, because some of the stuff is quite old in what they're trying to say, but the promotion is that it's there, they're there to help you and just to get everyone over the line. But the only way to get better with terms of security is for other schools to start talking to each other. It is as simple as that. You can have all these different attacks in the world. You can take the Salford City College one, you can take Nottingham University, you can take the Great Marlow one, which recently just happened. If they don't come out and say what's going on, no other school is going to have the same type of, even if they don't use the same applications, they still need the same knowledge to implement the same robust features. And you can change VLANs, you can change networks, you can change all of that type of stuff. But that's good to a 25% of the mark. If you run a scan on a 10.00, you could be able to find pretty much everything. So it just goes to show you how wide this can be.
I think that's a really good point, Chris, as well. And I think going on that, if we look at, I want to say it was the British Library cyber attack a few years ago. I think it was in 2023.
Yeah.
And they actually, if memory serves, I'm pretty sure it's those guys. They released a full AAR essentially. Ian, yeah, there you go. And that was like, I remember reading through that at the time and going, wow, these guys haven't held back. And that's really beneficial, even as a non-educational organisation, but nonetheless, still an organisation that's probably got similar systems in certain ways. Like many of us, we all use AD or have used AD or Entra or Workspace, whatever that looks like. A lot of these attack vectors apply to everyone, don't they? Just in a different context, etc.
Yeah, and when I tell people what to come out and actually say stuff, you don't have to go online and say what you need to do. If you hop on the phone call or something like that, then that's more than enough for other schools to act on, which is no problem at all. Head teachers, SLT leaders will always talk. That's the nature of their business. 100%. They have no choice but to talk. But when we look at the British Library and what they released, it's phenomenal. And I don't think there's any other one company that I know of that has released something like that. But British Library always go back to that, because they show the old infrastructure, they show the new infrastructure, and then they tell you how, when, why, and what. And that's the most crucial part of it.
Well, why do we think that schools don't actively come out and talk about this? Because I mean, it's massively underreported. You only really hear about the very worst case scenarios where schools do end up getting closed. And it, I always say to schools, it's not just the fact that it's happened. Actually, it's going to happen at some point, but it is the how you handle it, how you respond to it. Because if you're a parent, as I think some of us are, I certainly am, where you've got kids in the school and you find out that their Arbor's been hacked or their parent pay's been hacked or something like that, you're going to disengage from using a lot of those. A lot of those other third-party systems are used in multiple schools, so there's going to be that big impact. But surely we need schools to be talking up about the people who aren't putting in secure systems, who aren't treating cybersecurity as a number one solution, issue, and there's plenty of them out there who are just out to make a quick buck, particularly in a world where you can just fire up Claude and code something without necessarily knowing what the hell you're doing.
I think it's legally really complicated, though, isn't it?
Sorry, Elston. I was just saying, do you think there is a fear of reprisal by speaking out, right? Because the world we live in is a more litigious world. I mean, an MIS provider, which we will be aware of, which I won't name, tried to put people into extremely long contracts and things like that, and that went fairly litigious. Other MIS providers offered counter offers against those, and that also got. So there are some heavyweight players that are quite prepared to throw legal stuff around, and I think that scares some schools from speaking out. And also, I think there's possibly, I mean, I'm not, the trouble is that none of us have got any stats on this, right? Because it's so hush hush. But I think reputational cost, right? I dare say anyone who sat on a leadership board or a governor's board or a trust board will have had some kind of discussion. That's why people like Austin and Jack will definitely be aware of these sort of things about reputation in general, should something like that happen. So, I mean, I'll hand it back to you guys. But to me, legal/reputation can be two big reasons why schools are not doing the big printout of the British Library, which is what we need.
Yeah, that's it, Ian, and that's what I was going to link in with, was that reputational damage. I think is the biggest one, and I think, you know, to publish a public document like the British Library has done would be amazing from an educational point of view, but I don't think any board or exec team of a trust is going to do that because of that reputational damage.
I think that's such a shame, because we're talking about education and everybody learning at its basic level. Enabling others to learn from how you got there doesn't put any shade on the people who've got hit. And I keep on going back to this. For in our schools, in our education, in our homes, we've got to tell people that you know, it's not always their fault. Sometimes, you know, people are negligent, but it's very rare somebody would deliberately go and fall for one of these, you know, and do it. It's going to happen. So we've got to take away that stigma of it's happened to them, they must have been doing crap, because I just don't believe that for a second.
I think the other thing though, Matt, sorry, the other thing though is that I think we've got an underreporting issue, probably because just so many schools, trusts, organisations don't even know when they've been hit. If the kind of threshold that crosses your detection radar, where you go, right, there's been a cyber attack, is a nasty ransomware message with Bitcoin demands on a number of devices, I'd be fairly willing to wager that there's a number of a number of attacks that have been going on underneath the surface at those organisations for some time beforehand that haven't been picked up because the detection's not there. And I just think with a lot of schools are trying to build this kind of, or address this kind of risk, or build capabilities to address this risk on top of really, really low digital maturity, on top of years of technical debt. And so I think, Ian, your kind of wider view there that things have moved on a little bit in the last 3 years is really reassuring. But I just think we've got a little bit further to go than we all would like. And we around this table are probably guilty of some level of selection bias, because we've all decided to give up our Sunday evening to have a chat about cybersecurity, right? So everyone around the table here is going to, A, care about it probably quite a bit more than most, but B, we understand, we've got technical backgrounds, we understand how complicated this stuff is to kind of assure over a long period of time. And we understand that you can just get unlucky in some cases, or you can have, if you've got like 4 vulnerabilities that you've got to deal with, and you've only got budget or time or resource to address 1 or 2 of them, you could easily pick the wrong one based on a really robust assessment of risk. So you could have done everything right up to that point. It is really complicated. So we will all approach a story of somebody getting hit with a kind of, right, I don't really care about blame here, but not everybody's going to. And emotionally, that's really, really difficult to do if you've then got a personal stake in it. Like if it was a kid at a school that I had a connection with, I'd probably feel a bit differently about it than the British Library, for example.
Yeah, I think this is I think we've got to be honest, you know, that there are still schools with crap IT. There's still poor setups. There's still people in the roles that are not working at a level to be able to give the schools the protection that they need. They're so stuck in their ways of how they've done stuff, and for whatever reason, they're unwilling to move forward. Then you've got a completely different set of people who want to move forward, but perhaps don't know how to do it, aren't resourced for it, so therefore they can't reach out and ask for help. So they're doing the best that they can. And that goes back to what Austin was saying in terms of where do you start? Which one are you going to protect with a limited knowledge, limited fund? And then you've got the people who, goes back to what Ian was saying and Chris was saying in terms of they go completely to the other end of the scale where they forget the systems are there to do education, teaching and learning, and they've still got to be usable systems, and you've got to weigh up risks. We all know the securest way to have an IT system is not to have an IT system. So you've got to balance that with the bigger picture of what people have done. Key example of that is, filtering and monitoring. Do you block all the websites? Or do you open up?
Yeah.
Which way do you go? It used to be very much, didn't it? Block everything and leave just the other. Now we're actually absolutely encouraged from the DFE standards to actually do the other way around, where it is a case of, okay, here's the statutory blocks, but more generally, these, you want to make it a school level decision on here. But just on that point, Jack and Austin, really, and Chris, as you've only recently left education, I'm sure you've gone to events and you've seen these people who are not the right people in these roles in this modern setup that we're in.
So Matt,
in the nicest way possible.
Yeah. I'm going to come in quickly on that. I'm going to respond to that point. I just want to make another point quickly. Just following on the discussions that you guys have all just had there. I think, and I've got no data to back this up, so it's a classic Jack statement. But I think that from a educational perspective, I think we're really lucky because I think the IT digital tech teams across education communicate more than any other teams. So as in across different organizations. So I don't see estates managers, directors of estates communicating as IT professionals communicate, in the sense that, same with teachers, same with whatever. You could pick any director at HR, finance, ops. I think IT, from what I see, we get to know each other in the local schools, in the local trusts. We all communicate, we help each other. And I think that's really beneficial, because I think, yes, whilst, we talk about reputational damage and we can't always share X or Y because of various reasons, I think IT people still, we communicate in the right ways, that we're able to help each other, and we've got those networks, which I think is really valuable, that I don't think every other area in education has.
I agree. School business managers do have generally a good similar setup type thing, but I would I don't know, Chris and Ian, whether you feel this like I have coming out of education. Like we're all in the business of supporting kids at the end of the day, but I've certainly been exiled from places when I was a network manager. I'm not allowed to be on the ANME anymore. You have to have a badge if you're on EduGeek or others and that kind of thing. And I think that's a shame for many reasons, but in particular because, I'm managing 70, 80, 100 odd schools. If we want to have those open conversations about what we're all seeing on it, then it should be everybody working together to do that. And I think sometimes there's too much of a difference between, you're an MSP now, or are you working in school? Because one doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. Chris and Ian, have you seen that in your moving out of schools into your roles?
Yeah, I have, in terms of where I am, because where I do the installation for the ransomware containment and stuff like that, we see quite a few things where some MSPs are okay, some MSPs aren't okay, some education people are okay, some education people aren't okay.
Exactly.
And I think it's just a case of, it's just a broad statement. I think from an education point of view, if you're not trusted by the senior leadership team, then you're going to have to work hard and try and gain that trust. Once you gain that trust, you then probably got a better way of moving forward to get an understanding of what systems. And every school has the same system, wherever they say they don't or do, they always will have the same system, and that's the same from primary all the way up to university. So I can see the reputational damage coming in and everything, but I think if these emails or phone calls or something like that, that could just help any particular school at any given time, even if it's just some information on how to handle a past staff member with filtering DSLs. We still see schools in the DSL side of things where the IT is still doing a lot of the DSL side of things when they shouldn't be doing that, because there should be more.
Don't get me started on that one, Chris.
See what I mean? So I think they do have to working together. They need to get a set path and just say we need to do X, Y, Z here, and then finish at the end to where they want to
Well,
be.
here's a question for you, Chris, based on that then. And Austin, and Ian, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. And you, Jack, of course, so I'm not going to leave you out, don't worry. Okay, so we we know that safeguarding, although it's everybody's responsibility in an organisation, the specific role of a DSL and looking at the reports quite often falls to IT when it shouldn't be. You know, IT staff aren't trained in it. That is a tool. It's like they shouldn't be the ARB or the Bromcom or the SIMS manager either, because that's a different role. You just happen to be doing it on a computer. Where is the link between that and your IT staff and expecting them to be cybersecurity experts on top of the same people that will go and make your lights and sound work for production, same people who'd unblock your printers if there's a paper jam in it and stop it, you know, toner, same people who have got to manage your storage and your licensing and your network, you know, your network plans and everything like that. Where does cybersecurity sit in there? Is it one of these things that can be done? Is the role of a multi-academy allowing that to happen more now with bigger IT teams? What do we all think around that kind of point?
Austin, do you want to go, or do you want to?
Mate, Jack, you've been snubbed by Matt 3 times now, so you're going to have to jump in.
So, like, I think, and this probably links back to some of your previous question we never got round to, Matt, around sort of, you know, the IT people in education. Sometimes, you know, they're not the people. And that it's as simple as that, isn't it? Sometimes they're just not the guys. But I think the majority of the time, people aren't enabled. So, like, I think educational IT is one of those few sectors where actually you're expected to know everything about everything and deliver everything. Whereas, you know, you walk into other organisations, you'll have a cybersecurity team, not guy, but a whole team. You'll have, you know, people who's specific networking team, your NOC team, etc., apps team, MDM, like, so. I think there's this expectation where, you know, if you're in like that, again, that primary school, that single primary school, and you're just the IT guy there, you know, it could be a 2 form, could be a 4 form, you're expected to do everything. And as you said, the AV at the Christmas productions, etc. Whereas then you transition to those MAC teams, and you go, okay, maybe you've got a little bit more funding to have some more specific roles, but maybe you haven't, because actually, just because you're bigger and you have more schools doesn't mean you can necessarily have all these shiny roles. And I think we see that in Schools Week quite a lot with the state of education and some of these trusts at the moment and the situations they're in. It's not as simple as, oh, we've got X amount of schools, so we can have a cyber team, we can have a NOC team, we can have this. I think we're still having to specialise in, or I say specialise, we're still having to be multiple hats, and I don't think that will ever go away. I think there's scope where actually we can have some more unique calibers in the teams, like people who are, you know, cyber might be their core focus, but actually they still have to go and worry about a few other things as well. Until you get to the really, really big sort of mats where you've probably got a bit more scope from a team capacity and size and costing point of view. I think, no, you know, whether you're a single primary or a mat, you're still wearing multiple hats. That would be my experience. I would suggest.
I'd agree with that. I'd completely agree. And I don't think that I'll ever come away from it, because even if it's not just related to IT, but even as a teaching assistant or as a teacher, you got to do something else to help your other colleague or help the other students to do what is. So, and I think that's just education in the UK, just in general. So I'd agree with that completely. And I mean, if there was an issue to come in and they were quite futile about it, I mean, you have to calm them down, sit them down, show what's gone X, Y, Z, and go through the learning process again completely, if it must be, to get them more confident in what they're trying to do. And it's the same way as, say, you apply yourself as to what the teachers do to apply to the students. So you're teaching the staff on how to do stuff as well as the students as well. So you don't comprehend both in 2 different ways. Just because one's a bit ruder than the other one, you shouldn't really necessarily, I don't want to do that. You should have to keep on going flow with the process and train them to a good standard, to a point where you're both, or you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, completely agree,
Definitely.
Chris. Austin, where's your head at with this?
I think it's an operating model decision, isn't it? I mean, this comes back to all sorts of discussions around any kind of capabilities. Do you want it in-house? Do you want it outsourced? Or what mix of that do you want? And an example that's kind of readily, easily off the peg is most educational institutions would not consider outsourcing their teaching staff, their core teaching staff. That's the heart of their business model, and they'd go, right, this is the stuff we want to do in-house. Similarly, I don't know of any education institutions that feel like writing custom firewall firmware is something they want to do with an engineering team themselves because they can do it better themselves. So I think across an awful lot of things, you've got to design out a set of capabilities, divide them up, and decide what you want support from where. And in a smaller organization, you're going to end up wearing more hats. In theory, things are simpler as well. So actually, that isn't as much of a burden. Doing assurance of cyber across one school is an awful lot easier than doing it across 50 schools or doing it across 100 schools. And so that scaling, you guys talked about this a couple of weeks back about the article that was shared by James from Arbor on the costs of back office administrative services as trust scale doesn't necessarily go down, and there does introduce some duplication of things. So I think you've just got to design that as part of. These are one of the things that we're going to have to do when we're designing how we structure our IT teams, or how we structure our digital teams, or how we structure our central teams. It all kind of goes there. I think there are things with that you might want to say, well, actually, it's really important that this bit is done by somebody external, because if you do have an internal IT team, you certainly don't want them marking their own homework on all of their reporting, because your culture has to be absolutely perfect for that to not be a bag of risk waiting for somebody to look at it and unpack it. But similarly, the risk of outsourcing too much there is you lose your own agency, control, your ability to time things and link stuff up with the rest of your organization. I think we've all encountered MSPs or other organizations that are potentially less aligned with their customers over the years. And what you end up with there is a scenario where systems go down for reboots and for patches get installed, and no one's checked that it's parents' evening for you guys. And actually, you really can't afford to have it that day, but you could quite easily push it back to like the day after or the week after. So there's a real piece of work there that I think needs doing in any organizational design. And as is typical in education, we look outside the sector and find that actually there's an entire profession around that specific process. And you'll get a whole team of enterprise architects in large organizations that's all they do. They design their organization. And that's really useful for us because we've got an area of expertise we can borrow from. It's also a little bit challenging for us because, as you said, Jack, where you might get a team of 10 people to do something, we've got to do it kind of on the train home from somewhere that we've been that day, hoping that the Wi-Fi is good enough to allow us to get it done. And that's the only time
you
we've
don't
got.
go through a tunnel that cuts you off and starts.
Yeah.
But I think that was really great points there, Austin. I think you're absolutely right. You know that cyber is one of those things that can't just wait. You know, it can happen at any point in time and disrupt everything else, you know, that you're doing. And what can you drop to respond to it if you're a smaller team in there doing it, type thing. But let me take it back a little bit to something more fundamental, because we're using the term cyber and we're talking about cyber security. What are we actually talking about in schools? If somebody said to you about cybersecurity, what would you actually define that as? Because it was interesting that we said earlier on in terms, you know, at what level are we getting involved? Are we reporting? You know, is it an email, a phishing email that's been falling for, or is it something that's been malware and being encrypted? What are we terming as the concern when it comes to cybersecurity? Is an email still a concern, a phishing email, or is it
different for every organisation?
Yeah,
as well.
I think it will be different for every organisation, mainly because you don't know what the factors is within that organisation anyway. I think a lot of phishing side of things, in terms of that common sense, you try and do your training, but how many more phishing simulations can you do before your staff get too comfortable with the phishing simulations? And it's all that type of stuff. And, you know, in terms of your AV, can you isolate a device with your AV? If you can't isolate a device with your AV, then you should go around and have a look at a few more areas so where you can actually isolate the EDR and all that type of stuff. Obviously, the patching's a big one for a lot of schools. And they say if you have action one, just out of interest, up to 200 endpoints for free. If you're a very, very small school, go ahead and use it. And they won't care because it's up to 200 for free. But I think going back to Jack, it's entirely up on what the school is, what they think their
It's
priority.
the architecture, isn't it? Like
It
if
is.
you've got
It could
if
be
you're
their
full on
vision.
prem,
I think it has
that's
to
going to
be aligned with their vision as well in terms of what the school wants. So if you want to go all cloud scenario, then you've got to make sure that you go in all cloud scenario, but you've got to make sure that your OneDrive, your Google Drive is secure as it could possibly be. But what happens when the internet goes down? What is then those teachers going to do when the internet goes down? Will they get a textbook out and carry on with their thing? If something happens in the cloud, and let's say an account got compromised, that person could be down for weeks or months, depending on how the ICO wants to play it. So you don't know, do you? So I think with the vision itself, you have to correlate the IT with what the vision and what they want to be done.
really, really good points. Yeah, really good points there, Chris. Ian, I bet you've got something to say on this.
All you guys are bringing up, things that make my heart pounds in sympathy and in synchronization with everything you're saying. And all of you are coming up with really simple, eloquent ways of describing various frustrations and complications that we face. And Matthew, I think coming back to what you said, what is cyber? That to me is like the fundamental thing that I keep thinking in my head when I listen to you guys speak is, what are we? I mean, you said it right. What are we protecting, right? Cyber, people kind of think, cyber is the protection of digital information. Um, there are various interpretations of what cyber is. I like to talk about information security rather than cyber security, because fundamentally we're protecting the information, right? And that information is what allows schools to function. And I mean, what's the school there for? The school is there to safely deliver education. That's its product, right? Get children in, teach them in a safe and managed way. That's what we're trying to do. That's what schools are trying to do. And if we are that information that we use to run that school must be protected to continue to allow it to function safely, to continue it to allow it to function. So schools, more than anything, need to become resilient, right? Like, so I mean, classic example there when Chris was saying, if they've all gone to the cloud and the internet goes off, if they've only got a single internet connection, that's the same as like an on-prem server being attacked with ransomware, because the result's the same. You can't get to your data, or a power cut. Power cut across the school. What do we do? I don't know. Access controls down, heating's down, cooking's down. Is it safe to keep the school open? Temperature's got 3 more degrees, and we have to send all the kids home. Yeah. So I think schools need to think from a resilience perspective, but they also really need to sit down and identify what their crown jewels are and where they are. Because, like, are they on-prem? Are they in the cloud? Is it a bit of both? If one bit breaks, does it stop me getting the other bit? Understand what you are protecting and where it is, because no one has. I mean, you all said beautifully that the IT department in a school fundamentally is a jack of all trades. By definition, because I think IT guys in schools are actually the best generalists, because they have to deal with so many things. They think very broadly about impact and, is it teachers? Is it? They think about change management. I can't update the Wi-Fi on that night because they're doing something in the PE and there's an exam that evening, and they're going to be videoing that over here. All of these different things about impact. So, without actually being qualified in ITIL change management, we think about change management pragmatically. Without being qualified necessarily as cybersecurity specialists, we're thinking about, we're trying to protect, you work as an IT department of school, you're trying to protect them from every single attack on Earth without possibly knowing what half of those are, right? So sometimes, to me, it really helped to focus on, right, where is my data? What are my capabilities? What should I outsource? What should I keep in-house? Am I clever enough to digitally, forensically go through event logs and find indicators of compromise that could prove whether someone has broken into my network? Probably not, because I'm a generalist. I'm trying to keep the wheels on the train spinning, right? So is that a function that you need? Have I prioritized stuff in the right order? I really think, I mean, one of the things that really refocused me was, ironically, when the troubles in Ukraine started a few years back, right? There was a there was a SANS kind of emergency webinar. What should you do today if you are staring down the guns of like a national cyber terror? You know, if you're up against like a nation state cyber actor, what can you do to protect yourself? But the great thing I loved about it was these guys were being really pragmatic. So if I'm an attacker, I'm coming from the outside. Yeah, primarily I'm launching from the outside. So what is the first thing I am going to hit? I'm going to hit your firewall, right? Because that's the first thing. So if you haven't patched your firewall for 6 months, that's a problem. Now I know that when you haven't updated your firewall, you'll do it every half term when all the kids have gone home, because every time you update your firewall, you brick it, the internet's down for the whole day, teaching and learning's off, and then you've got a denial of service attack, right? I understand that, but at the same time, that's the first thing the enemy will touch. Are you publishing something through your firewall? Have you got like a VPN open? Have you got like a web server open? Have you got like like a boiler system, like a heating system open? CCTV open? Have you got these 5 things open, right? If so, if your firewall is patched, boom, I can't attack your firewall. Oh, but these 5 things are poking through your firewall. I'll have a problem then. Yep, nice. Oh, that CCTV software's 3 years old. Sweet. In we go. You know, that kind of. So this is the kind of thing. So once if you think about it, where are they going to touch first? If your firewall and your publishing and everything is tight, then the next thing to me, you know, not to blame the users, but every single person with a computer, what are they going to be doing every day? Reading something on the internet and sending and receiving emails. Okay. So if you are using a web browser, we're recording this through a web browser. Web browsers are the universal do everything everywhere tool. It connects to your hardware, to your printer, to your camera, to your keyboard, and it interprets so many different types of codes, and it has bugs in it. And because there's so many different things it has to do, there are plugins that have bugs in them. So that web browser, ironically, should be the first thing we probably patch, because it's the one thing everyone's using every day that touches stuff we can't control. Anything out on the internet, we can't control it. We don't know what it is. So anything that touches that should probably be kept more patched than anything else. You know, people worry about patching servers. If I'm attacking your network, to be honest with you, that's the destination. That's the last stop of the train ride. The first stop is beep, beep, firewall. The second stop is beep, beep, external services. Third stop is, well, if I can maybe get you to go to one of my dodgy websites, and maybe that's when social engineering comes up. So send you an email with a link, because people don't necessarily understand and there are so many different types of attacks. It's not just about, send a piece of malware into the building and let it run. Sometimes it's perfectly invite someone into a video conference, send something through chat. They're opening it in the middle of a live stream that you're recording. Oh, just do that. Yeah, great. Yeah, I've done it. Fantastic. Oh my goodness, it's a PowerShell script that's doing a whole bunch of other stuff. You don't know. I mean, Matthew today could have said all of us some horrific thing in the messaging. I don't know.
I was just gonna say, Ian, you know, you've just got an email from me. If you could just open that up and click that link, that'd be great.
But do you see what I mean? So I just think that people need to almost take a step back, not panic, but understand that you can prioritize, and that what should that priority be? You know, not necessarily just patch everything. A great patch everything kind of works, but if you kind of look at the number of patches there are currently in the universe and the percentage of those that are actually exploitable, it's a fraction. It's a fraction of a percent of the actual of the patches, right? So therefore, maybe we should just patch the ones that we know are bad first, rather than to patch everything. Yeah. That kind of those kind of things.
It links back what we said the other week, wasn't it, Jack? About that having that car on a driveway and not being the easiest one to rob.
So that's it, Matthew. And Ian, I was gonna say there, like, you've touched on so many really cool points, which actually I think you've almost kind of spilled a load of points to other points that we've raised earlier in the conversation. No need to apologise, because it's really good. But so, for example, one thing is like, okay, so make sure the firewall's patched, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what you're doing with the firewall? Your firewall might be patched, but you might have like a VoIP system coming through, whatever that looks like. The reality of actually is, as Austin went to go, that said, that might be a service that actually we allow to be managed by the MSP or someone specific who actually, that's got a firewall team. Those guys are going to do what and if we present to them like, oh, we need to do this port forwarding, we need to X or Y, they're going to turn around and go, yeah, no, like we're not going to do that, and this is why. And that example shows in multiple areas. I think it leads us really nicely onto something that Matt and I were probably quite keen to discuss, and we touched on at the beginning. And maybe we can just go around and each person, if we say one answer, or if possible, of what is it that education, whether you're one form entry religious school or a 55 school, Matt, or whatever that looks like, what's the one most valuable thing you think you could do tomorrow or start the process on to help build those defenses or start your journey if you've not already began on that cyber path? What do we think that looks like?
I think
Austin, I'm going to start with you. Or Chris, go on.
Yeah, I'll go for the response plan. Because you need to get some sort of information on the sheet and talk through your leaders. And we go back to what Ian said and what Matt said is say, you look at your data, okay, it's in Arbor, but what happens with Arbor if something goes really kaput with Arbor, you've got to then make sure that your communication templates are ready to go. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. And your response plan is probably the most crucial part of it, because you might be fine 95% of the time, but that 5% could be the most definitive answer that you need to have.
I think that's such a good point, Chris. And I'd turn around and say that schools practice fire drills, and they practice lockdowns more and more these days. They practice for Ofsted and they practice for all these other things that are going to happen, but they don't practice for this this situation, which will affect not only all of those things, but those other things. So I'm 100% backing what you're saying, and we know that there's the NCSE exercises in the box, which are really, really useful. But I think a lot of schools need to sit down and look and go, okay, we've listened to this. We actually need to action it, because it's so easy, isn't it, in life generally, that you've got so much going on that you know what you should be doing, but you don't get to it. And I just think from what you've just said, if they don't get to this, it's going to cause major, major issues.
I mean, the best, because I'd mentioned about fire drill before. I think I mentioned it to you in dinner when I was on one of the A&E meetings or something like that. They put it into fire drill. The best way to do a fire drill in terms of a network is literally just unplug the SFP connectors and just see what comes up. I'm going to say it now, God, I left the school now, but I did it a couple of times in order to see what was coming up at my old place. And it wasn't a lot. It was mainly more the cloud connection more than anything else. But the best way to do it is by unplug without actually killing all your environment. Just unplug the SFP connectors. So then you just lose it. And then after you telling your IT stuff to run around a headless chicken, it's acting like something's gone really bad. Get that into a process with your IT staff. That will then become to a normality as it grows. And then just put the SFP back in after an hour or so. Just make it.
I love that. I love that. I guess it comes down to
it's confidence from the leadership and also
it's the agency as well, though, isn't it? We've all talked about before how many people actually are going to get away with that as well. From a leadership point of view, are IT teams enabled? Are they trusted? If you do that, do you go and lose a load of trust, or are you actually reaffirming? There's a lot there.
It's always that one. I think. I remember it happening to me. I shut down the wrong host during a parents' evening, and at one of my very first jobs, just before I left, I accidentally deleted all the staff accounts in Active Directory, and the general feedback to me was, and it generally wasn't my why I did it, but was, are you just reminding us how much we need you? And I do think there's something to say sometimes for people to, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on, is that scale of impact, those many different systems that rely on it. Sometimes people do need to be, I'm not suggesting you go and do this without talking to anybody, and neither is Chris. We're not suggesting that you go into school tomorrow and think, I'm just going to remind them why I'm here and pull it out.
Yeah. I think
but sometimes you do have to, you have to do it in a controlled way so people can do it. And actually, that is one thing that when I speak to leadership teams in the strategic work that I do a lot at the moment, they're actually all for that. Actually, we need people to see what would actually happen in this situation because they don't quite get it at the moment. So some fantastic advice there, Chris. How about you, Austin? What are you thinking for your piece of advice?
For the starting point, I think take a look at the NCSC's CAF, the Cyber Assessment Framework. I mean, it's actually some of the language in there is a bit heavy, but it's really good. And you'd start off there with objective A, which is the manage the risk part. And the core part of that is, as Ian said, you've got to know what you have, what you're trying to protect. You've also got to understand your organization's appetite for risk. And you've got to have a connection with governance there that allows them to make those decisions and be informed about them properly. But that understanding of what it is that you have is the first thing I think people need to obtain, because without that, all of your planning doesn't work, because you may be missing something quite significant, or you may be focusing very heavily on something and then finding out that it's not significant at all. I do remember a conversation with a finance director about their component of planning for any kind of cyber incident or major issue with systems across a trust. They were a lot more casual about some of their systems being down than I was expecting them to be. And that was in large part because they could just run an alternative kind of makeshift one for a period of time and reconcile them later. And okay, that would be a real pain, but for the core things that needed to happen, they'd be able to move on. That was their view of it. And not every finance team will feel that way about it. And I think that's quite individual. So that's the starting point. Go read the CAF, start with objective A.
Fantastic. And Austin, just to follow on a question that a little bit, there is lots of different, as we've been saying all through, lots of different teams within the school. And I think the point where you're saying who needs what and finding out there is really the headline. But you've also got to be aware that some of these ones, like for exams, for example, are non-negotiable, are they? I mean, if your internet's down, they're not supposed to use the internet, but, you know, all these things on there. So it is about prioritizing them, isn't it? And understanding, you know, if your heating's controlled by it and it's the middle of winter, then that suddenly becomes a priority then compared to your finance system.
Yeah, so you'd start off with what do you have, and then you can move on to what's the impact on confidentiality, availability, integrity of all of those things, each of those services or information assets or physical assets. But that's definitely step two. Step one is understanding what you've had. And I think in all of those conversations, you need as much involvement as you can get from everybody else, because it does need to be shaped from them. The challenge I think a lot of organizations have is they don't have the correct interface between their IT teams and the leadership teams. The IT doesn't necessarily sit on leadership or isn't present, and there's a gap there. That's not often not a people issue. It might be culture. There's lots of complex reasons why that might be the case, but yeah, you need a real strong link there between your knowledge of your IT estate and the organizational leadership.
Yeah, definitely. I think it goes back to that, as you say, a big change is that we'd expect everybody working in education to know about safeguarding. It's built into everything by design. Cybersecurity's got to be in all those leadership roles, in all those teacher roles at different levels, just like safeguarding's at different levels. You know, everybody knows the basics of safeguarding. Everybody should know the basics of cybersecurity. And as your role depends and moves, you need to know the cybersecurity element of that just as much as you need to know the safeguarding bit, because ultimately any type of cybersecurity incident is going to come back to being a safeguarding incident. They're intrinsically linked these days. Ian, how about you? What's your advice for the world?
Gosh, brilliant thing. I mean, obviously, Chris and Austin have brought up the two most common things I do, like know what you've got to protect and have a plan in place, right? I suppose my take on, I think sometimes a school might just suffer from like paralysis or perfection paralysis. I'm trying to think of a proper word for it. When you got the elephant, you knows your problem and it seems so big that you rather than just start eating the thing one bite at a time, which is always my advice, because it's always one bite smaller than with the last one, right? Is that some people just kind of just falter because they're trying to achieve perfection and therefore they achieve nothing. So I think break the problem down, right? Is how I would look at it. And so from a resilience perspective, and I think I saw a talk with Luke Veer and his boss, in fact, talking about business continuity. So, I mean, there was, the NCSC, there was a really interesting kind of, from the last speech, there was a really interesting talk snippet that I saw on LinkedIn with one of the senior leaders of the NCSC and said, look, when all of your systems are gone, what have you got? It's just the people, right? That's it. So in some respects, I think don't try and find a technological answer to this initially. Break it down into business units. So let's say I rock up as an IT guy, even if I'm a really knowledgeable IT manager, I know that financial system X is installed. I know how to install the clients. I can probably connect it to the database. But if you say, hey, Ian, how do we reconcile this month's so-and-sos and make the paychecks go out? I would probably sit there and, have some kind of minor short circuit, and I just wouldn't understand how to solve the problem. Yeah. But the people in there know exactly how to do it. So I think if you look at a business organizational units, as in not Active Directory, but as in within your business. So the head of accounts will probably know exactly how the person who does payroll will know how to do payroll. If System X is up the Swanee, they'll know another way to do it, right? So you don't have to fix that. You just make sure that someone of senior level is talking to each organizational unit. Head of teaching, right? How are you going to teach today? We've got no interactive whiteboards, you've got no internet, and that computer is a doorstop. Away we go. What are we going to do? Where are the teaching materials? They're online. No, they're not. Okay, have we got a photocopy? Yeah, honestly, real back to basic things. And if everyone solves their smaller piece of the elephant, you put them back together, it's an elephant, right? And what you also then get by having like these separate abilities of a sub function of the organization to carry on is that if just that department is affected and everyone else is still going, they just drop in and run their bit rather than launch the whole of international rescue. They just launched just maybe Thunderbird 2, right? And Thunderbird, all the rest of the Thunderbirds all chilling out in the swimming pool, going, yeah, he's doing a great job, Virgil. So yeah, break it up, make the elephant small, break the elephant into chunks. And give back the power to the people who understand their subject the best. Because we were talking about, how do you know everything? We don't. So let the people who are the subject matter experts, solve the problem. And we can, by all means, be the glue and the coordination. They can come to us and say, is there a plan B technical solution to this problem? I'm trying to achieve X. That is our job to say, yeah, we can achieve X with Y. And we can even understand the risks and the things involved in that. But let them solve the problems. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I always think when I'm doing these podcasts, different types of people listening to it. And I think sometimes when it comes to cybersecurity, people just want a solution. You speak to a senior leadership team and they just go, will this fix my cyber problem? Will this protect us? And it's not that simple. The answer is no. This won't solve cybersecurity. If it was, we probably wouldn't be selling it on this small scale. It's a part of a jigsaw puzzle, and you need all those pieces in it to be effective. But I think that's a really good. All of those points there have come back to the fact that there is no one solution. There are solutions for those individual elements, which you have to find out what individual elements affect you first, and then you can look at what the best solution is there. And I'm sorry, senior leadership teams, I'm sorry, people who think that if they look at it binary, they can't print in that place, so we'll buy a printer and that'll solve the problem. A lot of schools still look at solving cybersecurity by, we don't have that, so we're going to go and buy antivirus, we're going to go and buy malware, we're going to, that is the solution to the problem. And it's not. And I think that's really important to get across, because people tend to listen to these or go to webinars or go to something, because I've delivered them like through the NAHT and others, and they're like, I actually don't have the answer. You haven't given me the answer. But I think actually in this podcast, we've really got down to telling people how to start to find that answer in terms of know what you've got. That is the core message here. Know what you've got, and then prioritize how you protect those elements based on your needs as an organization. So I think that was really great advice, tied up nicely by all three of you. So Jack, is there anything that you want to add on the end of it?
Just what I always bang on about, really. It's probably more to our technical colleagues listening around, don't over-engineer the solutions, because when we start over-engineering solutions, actually, we're probably opening ourselves up to new risks. Not all the time, but certainly sometimes. I think we've all gone and audited a school or taken over a school or whatever that journey to that school has got us to, and you're like, what the hell am I, what is this? How does this work? On a system that really you should know how it works, but the classic, you unplug the red cable that's plugged into the air conditioning unit, and for whatever reason, everything stops working. So I think if we don't over-engineer solutions, I think that's how we get there. So we have to make sure they're secure by default, design, do the job, all that shenanigans. But let's not have like crazy solutions in place unnecessarily, would be my mindset. And go to the cloud, as well. That might help with some of it. Not all of it, but some of it.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's been such a great chat, and I really appreciate Austin, Chris, and Ian, you coming on to have this conversation. As we said, it's on a Sunday night, so it must be a special breed of people to want to do that. But I'm sure lots of people will find the chat as interesting as what I've found just listening to you guys doing it. If you want to find out more about Austin, Chris, and Ian, you can find them all on LinkedIn. I'll pop a link in the show description so that you can reach out to them on there if you want to have a chat with them about anything that we've said. You can now follow our page on LinkedIn if you want to be notified whenever a podcast comes out. And we're looking to do more of these kind of like chats for an hour or so with multiple people. So what we'll do is we'll run a poll on our Spotify account on what the next subject could be. It could be MIS, it could be devices, cloud versus on-prem, data sovereignty, AI. We'll think of some options and we'll put them in there for people to hear. But all that's left for me to say is thank you so much to everybody who's joined in today. I really appreciate your input and your expertise. And we will see you for another episode in a fortnight. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, Matt.
Cheers,
Cheers, Matt. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is made possible by our sponsors, Secure Schools. Benchmark, improve, prepare. Reduce cybersecurity risks with expert tools and services built specifically for schools and trusts. Smoothwall, who exists to help keep children safe and thriving in their digital lives by supporting and empowering them and those who care for them in school, at home, and everywhere in between. Take control of your resources. Classroom Bookings is an online room booking system for schools, colleges, charities, and more. Organize your shared resources on your own schedule so users always know what is available and when. And First Pillar. At First Pillar, we provide expert operational and business leadership support for schools, academies, and trusts. Our mission is simple: to help school leaders focus on what matters most, pupils, by ensuring every aspect of school business management runs smoothly, compliantly, and strategically. For more information on the show and our sponsors, visit www.edtechpeople.co.uk.